Hey fellow tankers, Mobius Y here with another video for World of Tanks console. Today is the first video in the road to the T57 Heavy series with a brief overview on the M7 Tier 5 US light tank. So seeing as how this is only a Tier 5, my aim is to simply have this video only 15 or 20 minutes long, as not many people will spend a lot of time on this tank, especially if you manage to pull off as many good games as I did while playing it. So this first game here on Engsk, I recorded with my capture card, and at first glance you might be thinking Engsk isn't really a very good map for a light tank, whether or not you try to scout or not. Hopefully this gameplay will happily prove you wrong. As this game goes on in the background, I'll just discuss some of the pros and cons of the M7 light tank. Now, being that a light tank, the M7 does get that bonus of not losing its camouflage while on the move. It maintains its camo factor even while moving, as it does when it is sitting still. Light tanks are the only class of tanks that have that ability. So you can easily abuse this on the M7 Light, and it's a very handy thing to have. Now, before we go over anything else, I'm first going to cover the bad things about the M7. First and foremost, the two top guns on the M7 are kind of crappy. And that's to be expected. Light tanks aren't really renowned for good quality guns for their tier, but with the M7, they are exceptionally crappy, to be totally honest. They have low penetration values, they have very poor overall accuracy and dispersion on the move values, and they don't really do a heck of a lot of damage per shot. One of them, it gets made up for by having a high rate of fire, but it's still really tough to work with. The other poor thing about the M7 is it essentially has no armor to speak of. So if something hits you, unless it scores an auto bounce, it's pretty much going to pen and damage you. So if you are playing this tank and you get a bounce, as I have in a couple games. In fact, there was one game where I'm pretty sure I got about 8 bounces in a row. Just consider yourself extremely lucky. Go buy a lotto ticket that day, because that is your day. So you basically have to play this tank not to get shot. Also, especially because it only has 350 hit points. That is a very low value of hit points. And in the first 2 minutes of this game, I've only taken 3 hits, and I'm already down to less than 70 hit points. So I've lost over 2/3, over 3/4 of my hit points by only taking just a few shots in this particular game here. So you do essentially have to play very cheeky, taking pot shots to try and squeak in some damage where possible, when somebody isn't in a position to shoot you back. Especially when you're bottom tier, because when you're bottom tier and you start facing off against tanks that have 8.8 centimeter guns in German tanks, or even 90mm or 105mm guns in certain allied tech trees, for not just German tech trees, but the US tech trees, you'll start seeing some 90mm guns by about tier 7, and some 105mm guns by tier 7 if you're bottom tier in this tank. Those guns do quite a bit of damage. They'll do about 240 or 320 alpha damage, so anything sporting one of those guns takes off a huge chunk of your HP, essentially making you a one-shot in a single hit. So you have to be really careful with this tank. Another big downside of this tank having no armor to speak of is if artillery hits you at all, you're pretty much dead. Unless the artillery shell itself, whatever it hits you with, has extremely low alpha damage, you are pretty much dead. All it has to do is strike you just about anywhere, and it's an almost guaranteed penetration because of the really thin armor all over this tank. And it's a borderline guarantee that unless it's an extremely small caliber gun on, for example, a stock very low tier artillery, you're probably just going to die, simply due to the raw power of the shell. And that largely sums it up, I would think. The modules can be damaged pretty easily. The engine compartment in particular takes up a big section in the rear area of the tank, so it can be damaged pretty easily. Because it's such a tight, compact tank, it's very common for, even if you do take a hit, you get a module damaged or a crew member taken out. So expect that to happen often if you do get shot. That's why it's equally important not to get shot with this tank. The positives about this tank, it's got an exceptional view range, 380 meters base view range for a tier 5 light tank. That is fantastic. The top speed is also excellent, 64 kilometers per hour. It also has really good traverse rates. We'll go over the exact values very shortly here in the garage as this first game wraps up here on Engsk. And honestly, despite his two top guns having their major downfalls of poor accuracy when sitting still and fully aimed in, poor dispersion on the move, making it very difficult to shoot and hit things from afar, especially while moving, they both actually sport pretty good DPM, but the gun in particular that I'm using, that I recommend you use in this review video, has even better DPM. So pulled off an Ace Tanker badge that game, 1,886 damage dealt with the M7, farming a lot of damage against a few tier 5 heavy tanks that game, easily nabbing a high caliber, and netting myself the first mark of excellence on the M7. And that was actually my last game in the M7 before I had enough XP to research the T21. So it was a really nice game to finish things off on. So the general gist of how you want to play this tank, you'll find yourself middle or bottom tier pretty regularly, especially because, you know, people tend to just flock to higher tiers. The player count is just not as big in the lower tiers, so you'll find yourself bottom tier pretty regularly. I just recommend playing this like you would any other scout. Just be cheeky, take opportune moments when you know you can take on a single enemy tank and get away with it by taking no or very minimal damage, because your HP is very precious in this tank. You have so little of it, and you can either flat out kill them or weaken them so much that a teammate can easily finish them off. So you really just want to be patient, make lots of effectiveness of your big view range to get some spotting damage in the early stages of the game, and once the field gets cleared out and you're in the middle and late stages of the game, just pounce on people and use your fast firing gun to finish off big chunks of their HP very quickly. So let's go ahead and take a look at the packages on the tank first, and taking a look at the general stats. So the grind on the M7 might be a little bit poopy for some people, because you could still wind up spending a bunch of time on this tank. The very first package will be about a little over 5,000 XP to research. It gives you the engine and tracks upgrade to maximize this tank's mobility, which is really nice. And then the next two packages here, you have the choice between the one that goes up to the next tank, the M7E1 Light. This gives you the fully upgraded 75mm gun. It's a slight improvement over the stock 75mm gun that you get. Emphasis on slight, minor increase in penetration, rate of fire, but things like the damage stay the same. This top gun has a rate of fire of 12.5 rounds per minute. Its penetration, like I said, is pretty poor. 92 millimeters with the standard AP, 127 with the premium APCR for 110 average alpha damage, and the HE only has 38 millimeters of penetration for 175 average alpha damage. The aim time is fantastic with 1.9 seconds of aim time, and the overall accuracy is 0.38. So this top gun, it looks like at first glance it would be more consistent and better to use, simply because it has a better aim time and accuracy value, and it has quite a bit better dispersion than the other gun. The other option is this optional M7E1 with the 6-pounder. This top package still gives you the same values in other modules, which we'll go over first. You get the Wright CR975C1L engine with 600 engine horsepower. That's a lot of horsepower, so this thing will accelerate very well, easily kicking up to 40-50 kilometers an hour in a few seconds. You've got a track traverse speed of 48 degrees per second, making it very easy to circle and maneuver around enemy tanks in tight spaces, even, as you saw me do even on Engsk. And the turret has a traverse rate, of 46 degrees per second, so it will easily keep pace with your tank when you are circling an enemy. The view range, as I said, I said 380, but it's only 360, my mistake. That's odd. I could have sworn it was 380, but apparently I'm wrong, so, you know, whatever. Toss that out the window. And you've got a signal range of 745 meters. Now, this 6-pounder gun, here's why I recommend using the 6-pounder gun over the other one, the 75mm gun. You have a rate of fire of 20 rounds per minute. That's nearly double, not quite, but here's why I want to use this gun over the other one. The penetration values of the standard AP rounds are 105mm, and the premium APCR 170mm. That is a massive improvement in penetration over the other gun's premium APCR. The standard ammo, only a little bit more penetration, but it makes a huge difference. Trust me on this one. I thought I would be much more content with the previous gun, even with the lower pen, simply because it has more consistency, higher alpha damage. It would just be better for picking off chunks of HP at a distance. And the damage is only 75 points worth of damage for average alpha. The aim time is 2.3, so that's not terrible. That's pretty average, but significantly worse. Well, not really significantly, noticeably worse than the 75mm gun. And the overall accuracy is only 0.43 for a base value. That's quite bad. It's not very good. And honestly, the dispersion while moving the tank and rotating the turret with this gun is much, much worse. But trust me, this is still the gun you'll want to use, because with that really high rate of fire, and despite it having lower alpha damage by about 35 points, the extra penetration will just make it much more easier for you to shred large amounts of HP, especially on tanks that are a fairly similar tier to you. Even some tier 6 tanks will lose quite a bit of HP. But for example, if you find yourself bottom tier and going up something like a Tiger 1, which has 1500 HP for you to go through, it'll take a while to kill it, but it can still be done with your really nice maneuverability. So all in all, it'll require about 20,000 XP to research all the packages for the M7, and you need another 32,300 to research the T21 at tier 6. So it can cause some players to take much longer than expected on this tank to fully elite it, especially if you don't have a premium account and simply can't get the handle on this tank and do not have very good games in it. So let's take a look at the supplies that I used. For ammunition, this tank carries a lot of ammunition, 155 rounds total with the 6-pounder. I carried 125 standard AP and 30 APCR. If you have some extra silver lying around, or you have, for example, a premium account, I recommend carrying a hefty amount of APCR, because you're going to be using it quite a bit, just to guarantee that you get some pens, especially against higher tier tanks where you can rake in massive amounts of XP just by doing big chunks of damage on them by repeatedly shooting them with your APCR rounds. For consumables, very standard. Small repair kit, small first aid kit, manual fire extinguisher, each costing only 3,000 silver to resupply. I don't really see any reason to use the premium equipment on this tank, seeing as how it's only a tier 5. If you want, I would just recommend swapping out the manual fire extinguisher for an automatic fire extinguisher to reduce the chance of fire if you have the extra silver available. For equipment, I set this thing up as a scout, because that's what it is at heart. I still put on the medium caliber tank gun rammer, which drops the reload of the 6-pounder to only about 2.5 seconds, so it shoots really quick. And then the other two pieces of equipment, coated optics and improved ventilation to maximize the view range of this tank. It already has a pretty dang good base view range on the top packages itself, and of course the vents and the gun rammer again will reduce the reload time of the gun itself, so just maximizing the DPM potential of this tank, which is super handy. For other possible equipment, the only thing I would recommend is possibly a vertical stabilizer. This tank's only tier 5, and yet it can still mount it, which would really help with that dispersion on the move if you find it very troublesome. I don't really recommend it though, because it's just so bad that even helping it out isn't really going to you're not going to find yourself landing more shots more frequently when you're trying to circle things. We're not going to go into the armor profile, because like I said, this thing has pretty much no armor, and there's no major point in going over where the crew or modules are located, because this thing can only take a few hits with its small HP pool. I would just recommend shooting it anywhere in the rear of the hull to try and damage the engine deck and cripple its maneuverability. That's about it. Crew skills, I have a pretty good crew in this tank. When I was playing it though, I was curious why it was taking the track so long to repair, and yet I was 100% certain that I had repairs on the crew. However, I did not have repairs trained on the crew while I played this tank. So you either want to make sure you have repairs trained on this crew, or just be sure to use your repair kit if you ever find your tracks getting blown off. As this next game loads up, I'll just have you know that my crew skills on the crew while playing this tank, I had Mentor, Brothers in Arms, Sixth Sense, Camouflage, Clutch Braking, Snapshot, Smooth Ride, and Pain Tolerance. And that's the crew skills that I had while this tank was working for me. So this next game on Arctic Region is actually from one of my recent streams. I was playing by myself, and I was quite talkative because the chat was fairly lively, amazingly so. So this game's going to take a little bit longer, and that'll wrap up this video. But me, as I said, centering on playing this tank like a scout. First things first, I want to try and get into a spot where I can get some early detections, light up some enemy tanks, and discover where they are. I'm bottom tier, so I don't want to go too crazy here. They only have one enemy light tank on the other team, but he's platooned with a fellow medium tank. So if I run into the enemy light tank, chances are his medium tank buddy is going to be backing him up somewhere. So I don't want to encounter that on my own. I just need to play super conservative, get some early spots, early detections on enemy tanks, try and get some spotting damage to start things off. As spotting damage is a very easy way to rake in XP, even in a scout tank, especially if you have such a good view range on a tier 5 light tank such as this one, and you've equipped your tank to maximize that as much as possible. With just the equipment that I have on this tank, the coated optics and the improved ventilation, I'm easily sporting over 400 meters view range with this tank, which is very impressive for a tier 5. Still very capable of spotting and especially outspotting enemy tanks, even when you're bottom tier. So I lit up a few tanks early, just got 3 detections. A top tier enemy Panther, a top tier enemy Tiger tank, the Tiger 1-3 run premium tier 7 heavy tank, as a matter of fact, and the Crafts Panther going to the southern areas of the map. So I'm not seeing much going on in the middle of the map here. I'm just trying to reposition, see if I can light up anything else. We haven't seen much yet, so they've got to still be maneuvering. I'm going to try and see if I can just get them lit up so we can tell where they are. So I get 3 more enemy detections. One of them is a VK3601H, as well as 2 or 3 other tanks up there on the ridge. I'm not shooting at any of them yet. I don't have a very good shot, but I know this T20, he's turning his side to me, so I try to take a pot shot, get an easy pen into his side.
Yeah, I got a hit.
Even with the poor accuracy on the top gun, the poor overall accuracy and range, so long as you try to make your shots count, there'll be times where, you know, of course you'll miss because RNG, but there's also plenty of times where you'll still hit. So long as you take those shots where the odds that if you hit the tank you're going to pen are significantly higher than if you hit a piece of thick armor and it's just going to bounce off. If that T20 kept his front towards me, or I saw mostly just his turret and his turret was turned mostly in my general direction, I would not have bothered with that shot. But because the T20 has very poor side armor, as do a lot of American tanks, I took the chance, and it paid off with my first early pen. It can be a little bit difficult to pull off a decent amount of damage in this tank. I always try to do just a little bit more than my HP amount in whatever tank I'm playing. With this gun, it can be in particular very difficult because you're only doing 75 points of damage with each penetrating shot. So you have to make several of them count, and you have to try and keep yourself alive long enough and get yourself in situations where you can get enough of those shots to pen them. So after a few failed shots in the VK36, I finally get a few penetrations on him. He spends a while aiming in on me, so I think he's going to try blind firing me. So I duck down, and sure enough, he blind fires in my direction. But of course he gets the miss. And while he's on the reload, I pop back up, shoot a few more APCR through his front, and finish him off. So getting several penetrations against that VK36. I've now got 6 penetrations. That's easily about 400 or 500 damage with this gun, depending on how the damage rolls were. And they were pretty normal, in the 70s range. So I know I've got about 400 or 500 damage dealt in this tank. That's good enough for me, damage-wise. For the rest of the game, doesn't really matter to me what happens if I rack up some more damage or if I just get some spotting damage helping finish off these enemy tanks, since some of them are still hanging back towards the base and trying to snipe from very long range. But I decide I want to try and get some more damage, so I pull in, and I'm going to go after the people that are fighting up here in the northwest corner of the map. There's an enemy Warlord Panther that just got taken out, and there's also an enemy Tiger 1 heavy tank. And the Tiger 1's pretty healthy, so I know I can farm a lot of HP off of him with my gun. So first shot on the move completely misses. Second shot hits him in the back and fully pens. I switch to APCR just to guarantee that I will go through no matter where I hit him. And he tries to get his gun around on me and then decides against it for some reason, so I just keep peppering him with my little gun. Just taking off small chunks of damage here and there. Ping, ping, ping. The rest of the team is shooting him as well as they line up their shots, and he gets taken down pretty quickly. He just had too many people to deal with at any one time. So a total of 13 pens with 1 tank knocked out in my favor. Off to a good start with this game, of course. As you can see, shooting on the move there. Very, very poor dispersion, but nevertheless, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, as said by famous hockey player Wayne Gretzky. So sometimes you can still just want to pop off a shot here and there while you're on the move. Maybe you'll get a lucky pen, maybe not. There's only this enemy Panther left and their artillery, so we're just closing in on this Panther. I'm trying to farm some more damage on him. The Panther has lots of HP as well, and he's pretty healthy, so I get a few more pens in him before he gets taken out. 4 hits and a 5th hit. I've knocked out 2 tanks this game now, so 18 penetrations this game, easily pulling over 1,000 damage by now in a bottom tier game while playing the M7, and I easily detected half the team while they were moving out. Only got a little bit of spotting assist damage, but that's okay. GW Panther misses a shot. He hits the barricade directly in front of me, so now I know I can just take off the rest of his HP, getting some more damage. Finishing off this game with an obvious mastery badge. 22 total penetrations, 3 tanks knocked out. Fantastic game in the M7 yet again on Arctic region. A map that is better suited to a tank like the M7 when utilized strictly for scouting in particular. So as you can see, mastery badge, 1,700 total damage dealt, pulling in 2,300 XP without the help of ops, since all of my damage dealt was to higher tier tanks. I was able to rake in a lot of XP that game. And that'll sum it up for the overview of today's tank. Like I said, I didn't want to spend too much time on it as it's only a tier 5. So if you manage to pull off the occasional good game as I did in these replays, I was actually pretty consistent with this tank. I found it that my games were pretty regular. It was pretty easy to get up about 500 or 600 damage. There was not very often I wasn't able to do at least the M7's HP worth of damage in a single game in order to pull in lots of XP. I tried to constantly do damage to higher tiered tanks if I found myself middle or bottom tier especially. It's very difficult to do, but the penetration on the APCR rounds on the M7 with that 6-pounder gun is actually really good at 170 millimeters, so that's why I recommend you use that gun over the top 75 millimeter gun. It also just sports better DPM overall. So I hope this video gave you guys a better idea of how you can play the M7 to your advantage and use it effectively. This is actually a surprisingly fun tank. I enjoyed it, not just because it's super fast and I just want to go fast all the time, man. I mean, some people like that. If you're looking for a quick tank that is very speedy and can be very enjoyable to play, if you just have a need for speed, this might be a tank for you. Consider trying it out, or just consider starting off going down the T57 Heavy line. Like I said, this tank was a very pleasant surprise, and I hope it is for you as well. This has been Mobius Y for World of Tanks console. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the battlefield. Happy tanking.